For all the late nights we've spent diving into spooky, terrifying, and just plain bizarre unsolved mysteries, there's one thing that's always more satisfying than a good conspiracy theory: a definitive answer. For years, these cases have been the stuff of internet legend, fueling nightmares and endless Reddit threads. But the game has changed. Technology, detective work, and sometimes just dumb luck have finally cracked the code on some of the most infamous cases we've ever obsessed over. So get ready for some serious closure, because today we've got 5 iconic BuzzFeed Unsolved cases that are, against all odds, officially solved. Our first stop is the windswept, lonely dunes of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, a place that's usually a postcard for summer vacation. But on July 26, 1974, it became the setting for a real-life horror story. Imagine this: a 12-year-old girl is out walking her dog, enjoying a summer day, when the dog starts barking uncontrollably and pulls her toward a secluded spot in the sand. There, lying on a faded green beach blanket, was the decomposing body of a woman. But this wasn't just a body, it was a statement. This was a murder designed to erase a person from existence. The crime scene was brutally, meticulously savage. The victim, a woman with auburn hair tied in a ponytail, was lying naked. The cause of death was a catastrophic blow to the head, a strike so powerful it had nearly severed her head from her body. But the killer wasn't done. To ensure she would remain a ghost, they had pulled out most of her teeth and, in a final act of identity theft, had chopped off both of her hands at the wrists. The only personal items left were a pair of Wrangler jeans and a blue bandana, which were neatly folded and placed under her head, a bizarre and chilling imitation of a pillow. It was a gesture of mock tenderness in the midst of absolute barbarity, and with that, the legend of the Lady of the Dunes was born. For 48 long years, she was one of America's most famous Jane Does. Her case became a vortex of speculation, drawing in every dark character on the eastern seaboard. Investigators worked tirelessly, but every lead turned into a dead end. Was it the notorious Boston mob boss Whitey Bulger? He was known for pulling his victims' teeth, a gruesome signature that made him a prime suspect. Or maybe it was Tony Costa, a local serial killer who had dismembered his victims in the nearby town of Truro just a few years earlier. He was the boogeyman of the Cape, and the lady's murder certainly fit the profile of a monster. Even a convicted murderer named Hayden Clark tried to take credit, confessing to the crime from prison. He later gave a quote, saying, "I could have told the police what her name was, but after they beat the crap out of me, I wasn't going to tell them." Turns out he was lying anyway. Over the decades, investigators tried everything. They commissioned clay reconstructions of her face, hoping someone might recognize her. They exhumed her body not once, not twice, but 4 separate times. In 1980, 2000, 2013, and finally in 2022, each time hoping that a new scientific advancement could crack the case. For nearly half a century, nothing worked. She remained a nameless ghost haunting the dunes. Then, on October 31st, 2022, because of course it was Halloween, the FBI dropped the bombshell everyone had been waiting for, using the holy grail of modern cold case investigation, investigative genealogy. They had finally given the Lady of the Dunes her name back. She was Ruth Marie Terry, a 37-year-old woman from Tennessee. The mystery of who she was had been solved. But that just opened the door to the even bigger question: who killed her and got away with it for so long? The answer, it turned out, was closer to her than anyone could have imagined. Her killer was her own husband, a man named Guy Rockwell Moldaven. And Moldaven wasn't just some husband who snapped. He was a lifelong predator who had left a trail of missing and dead people in his wake, a monster hiding in plain sight. After identifying Ruth, investigators discovered that she had married Moldaven in 1973 or 1974. They were newlyweds, traveling the country on their honeymoon when Ruth vanished. Moldaven returned from the trip alone, driving Ruth's car and telling anyone who asked that they'd had a fight and he never saw her again. It was a lie he maintained until he died of a lengthy illness in 2002, having lived a full life of freedom. But a look into Moldaven's past revealed a pattern of horrifying behavior. Back in 1960, his second wife, Manzanita Ryan, and her young daughter Dolores mysteriously disappeared from their home in Seattle. When police searched Moldaven's property, they found dismembered human remains in his septic tank, In a complete failure of the justice system, prosecutors felt they couldn't definitively prove the remains belonged to the two missing women, so Moldavan was never charged with their murders. He was only charged with unlawful flight to avoid testifying. His evil went back even further. In the 1950s, he was the primary suspect in the murder of a truck driver and the kidnapping of the driver's teenage girlfriend, who was never seen again. This was the man Ruth Terry married. The timeline was damning. Ruth was last seen alive by her family in 1974. A few months later, the Lady of the Dunes was found. It's now believed Moldavan murdered her during their honeymoon, smashed her skull, and then used his knowledge of butchery to remove her hands and teeth before dumping her body in Provincetown. On August 28, 2023, the Cape and Islands District Attorney officially named Guy Rockwell Moldavan as the killer and declared the case closed. After 49 years of silence, the ghost of the dunes was finally laid to rest. This case is, without a shadow of a doubt, 100% solved. Moving on, we're heading down under to Adelaide, Australia, for a case so layered in mystery, it felt like it was scripted by John le Carré himself. This is the story of the Somerton Man, a mystery that for over 70 years was the undisputed king of Australian cold cases. The scene is set on December 1st, 1948. The body of a man is discovered on Somerton Park Beach. He's dressed sharply in a suit and tie, looking for all the world like a businessman who fell asleep against the seawall and never woke up. There were no signs of violence, no struggle. But police quickly realized this was no simple death. The man carried no wallet and no identification. In fact, every single tag had been meticulously cut from his clothing. He was a ghost, a perfectly anonymous figure. An autopsy only deepened the intrigue. The coroner found evidence of poisoning, specifically intense organ congestion, but couldn't find a trace of any known substance. This suggested a sophisticated, undetectable poison, something straight out of a spy thriller, and the case was about to get its biggest spy thriller cliché yet. During a more thorough examination of the man's clothes, investigators found a hidden fob pocket sewn into his trousers. Tucked inside was a tiny, tightly rolled piece of paper bearing just two printed words, Tamam Shud. The phrase, which is Persian for "it is ended" or "it is finished," was identified as being torn from the final page of a poetry collection called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Police launched a nationwide appeal to find the exact copy of the book. In a stroke of luck, a local man came forward. He said he'd found a rare edition of the Rubaiyat tossed into the back of his car, which he had parked near Somerton Beach around the time of the death. When police examined the book, the Tamam Shud slip was indeed missing from the last page, but that wasn't all they found. Penciled into the back of the book were 5 lines of capitalized letters that looked like a coded message, along with the unlisted phone number of a local nurse named Jessica Jo Thompson. This felt like a massive break, but when questioned, the nurse was evasive. She denied knowing the dead man, but admitted she had once given a copy of the Rubaiyat to an army lieutenant named Alfred Boxall. For a thrilling moment, police thought they had their man. But they tracked down Alfred Boxall, who was very much alive and still had his copy of the book, complete with the Tamam Shud page intact. The Somerton Man was someone else. The trail went ice cold. The mystery exploded into a global obsession. Who was this man? The prevailing theory was that he was a Cold War spy, killed by enemy agents on Australian soil. The code was his final, unsent message. The untraceable poison, the removed clothing tags, it all fit the narrative of a covert operative silenced before he could complete his mission. For 74 years, that's where the story stalled. The Somerton Man was buried under a tombstone that simply read, "Here lies the unknown man." Enter the 21st century. An Adelaide professor named Derek Abbott became obsessed with the case. He managed to track down something incredible. A plaster bust of the man's head and shoulders made by police in 1949. Embedded in that 70-year-old plaster were a few strands of the man's hair, and where there's hair, there's DNA. Working with the renowned American forensic genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick, Abbott and his team embarked on a Herculean task. They extracted a DNA profile from the hairs and used it to build a massive family tree, linking the unknown man to distant relatives through genealogical databases. It was like a real-life episode of CSI playing out over several years. They sifted through thousands of names, building a complex web of ancestry until they finally zeroed in on one person. In July 2022, they announced the breakthrough the world had been waiting for. The Somerton Man was not a spy. He wasn't a secret agent or an international criminal. His name was Carl Charles Webb, and he was an electrical engineer and instrument maker from Melbourne. He was born in 1905, making him 43 years old when he died. Public records revealed he was married to a woman named Dorothy, nicknamed Doff, who had moved to Adelaide. It now seems likely that Webb traveled to Adelaide to find her, though the reasons for their separation and his trip remain unclear. The so-called code in the book? It's now believed it might have been shorthand for betting on horse races, something Webb was known to do. While the official cause of his death is still unconfirmed, the central mystery, his identity, is over. The romantic myth of the dashing spy has been replaced by the more grounded and perhaps more tragic story of a regular man whose life ended on a lonely beach. The question of who he was is definitively solved. All right, let's talk about a case that single-handedly made an entire generation afraid of elevators. A case that became an internet phenomenon, fueled by one of the creepiest pieces of footage you will ever see. We're heading to Los Angeles, to the infamous Cecil Hotel, for the deeply unsettling and now fully understood death of Elisa Lam. In January 2013, Elisa, a 21-year-old student from British Columbia, was on a solo trip across the West Coast, which she chronicled on her blog. She was bubbly, adventurous, and in daily contact with her family, but her journey took a dark turn when she checked into the Cecil Hotel, a place with a history so cursed it makes the Overlook Hotel from The Shining look like a five-star resort. It's been home to serial killers like Richard Ramirez and Jack Unterweger and has a long, grim history of suicides and violent deaths. Elisa was initially placed in a shared hostel-style room, but her roommates quickly complained about her odd behavior, including leaving them strange notes, and she was moved to a private room. On January 31st, 2013, the day she was scheduled to check out and head to Santa Cruz, she vanished. Her daily calls to her parents stopped. The LAPD was called in, and they conducted a search of the hotel, as much as they legally could without a warrant for every room. They searched her room and used K9 units to sweep the building, including the rooftop. The dogs detected her scent but couldn't locate her. For 2 weeks, there was nothing. Then, on February 13th, the LAPD released the last known footage of Elisa, and the internet exploded. It was a grainy video from inside one of the Cecil's elevators. In the footage, Elisa enters the elevator and presses nearly all the buttons, but the doors don't close. She then peeks out into the hallway, like she's checking if someone is following her. She ducks back in, pressing herself into the corner as if to hide. Then she darts back out into the hall, where she stands and makes a series of bizarre, fluid hand gestures, almost like she's talking to someone who isn't there. Finally, she wanders off screen, and the elevator doors, which had been inexplicably stuck open, suddenly close and continue as normal. The video went viral, and the theories were insane. The internet became a cesspool of supernatural speculation. People claimed she was being haunted by one of the Cecil's many ghosts. Others insisted she was playing the elevator game, a Korean urban legend where pressing buttons in a specific sequence supposedly transports you to another dimension. The video was dissected frame by frame, with people claiming to see ghostly apparitions or evidence of a hidden pursuer. The mystery deepened as guests at the hotel began to complain about foul-smelling black water coming from their taps and showers. The water pressure was also incredibly low. On the morning of February 19th, a maintenance worker, Santiago Lopez, went to the roof to investigate the hotel's 4 massive water cisterns. He climbed a ladder, opened the heavy lid of the main tank, and was met with a horrifying sight. Elisa Lam's naked body was floating inside, her clothes in the water beside her. The discovery only fueled the conspiracy theories. How did she get onto the roof, which was protected by a locked and alarmed door? And how did she get into the tank and close the heavy lid behind her? It had to be murder, right? Wrong. The official coroner's report brought a much more tragic and grounded explanation. Her death was ruled an accidental drowning, with her diagnosed bipolar disorder listed as a significant contributing factor. Suddenly, every bizarre element of the case made perfect, heartbreaking sense. Elisa's family confirmed she had a history of severe bipolar disorder and was on a cocktail of 4 different medications. They also stated that she sometimes wouldn't take her medicine, which had previously led to psychotic episodes where she would experience vivid hallucinations and paranoia, often causing her to hide. An autopsy revealed she was under-medicating at the time of her death. Her erratic behavior in the elevator, the hiding, the frantic gestures, the apparent conversation with an unseen person, wasn't paranormal. It was a textbook example of a young woman in the throes of a severe manic episode. As for the logistics, they were also easily explained. While the main rooftop door was locked, there was another way up, a fire escape that was easily accessible from one of the hotel's windows. This route would have completely bypassed the alarm. In fact, police dogs had tracked her scent to a window that led directly to it. And what about the supposedly sealed water tank? The worker who found her testified that the lid was open, not closed. The idea that she couldn't have lifted the lid herself was a myth that grew online. It's now believed that during her state of psychosis, likely feeling pursued or terrified, she climbed onto the roof seeking refuge and hid inside the water tank. Tragically, once inside, she was unable to get out and succumbed to the cold water. There was no ghost, no killer, no interdimensional elevator game. There was only a devastating mental health tragedy that unfolded in the worst possible way. It's a sad and sobering conclusion, but this case is definitively solved. Next, we're going to Philadelphia for a case that has been a deep, bleeding wound in the heart of American true crime for 65 years. It's the story of a little boy who was thrown away like garbage and whose face, printed on posters across the country, became a symbol of the ultimate cold case: the boy in the box. The story begins on February 25th, 1957. A young man was checking his muskrat traps in a wooded area in the Fox Chase neighborhood of Philadelphia when he saw a large cardboard box. A few days later, a college student who was also in the area saw the box and, driven by curiosity, decided to investigate. The discovery he made would haunt the city for generations. Inside a bassinet box from a J.C. Penney, wrapped in a worn plaid blanket, was the naked, bruised body of a little boy, estimated to be between 4 and 6 years old. The scene spoke of a short life filled with pain and neglect. He was severely malnourished. His hair had been recently and crudely chopped off, with loose clumps still clinging to his body. He had several scars, including some from what appeared to be minor surgical procedures on his ankle and groin. The autopsy determined his cause of death was blunt force trauma. He had been beaten to death. The city of Philadelphia was heartbroken and galvanized. The Philadelphia Police Department launched one of the most extensive investigations in its history. They printed over 400,000 flyers with an artist's rendering of the boy's face and, later, his post-mortem photo. The flyers were plastered in every post office and police station. In an unprecedented move, a copy was included with every single gas bill sent to residents in the Philadelphia area. The story went national, capturing the attention of the entire country. But in a baffling turn of events, not one person came forward to identify him. It was as if this child had been born a ghost, completely invisible to the world. For 65 agonizing years, he was known only as America's unknown child. The case was passed down through generations of homicide detectives, many of whom kept a picture of the boy on their desks long after they retired, refusing to let him be forgotten. Over the years, theories came and went. The most prominent one involved a nearby foster home. A woman, referred to as Martha, came forward with a story that her abusive mother had purchased the boy, subjected him to horrific physical and sexual abuse for years, and then killed him in a fit of rage after he threw up his dinner. She claimed her mother forced her to go with her to dump the body in the Fox Chase woods. While some elements of her story seemed plausible, investigators could never fully corroborate it, and it remained just another frustrating dead end. His small grave at Ivy Hill Cemetery was a testament to the decades of failure, bearing the heartbreaking inscription, "Heavenly Father, bless this unknown boy." But time brings new technology, and the science that had solved so many other cold cases was finally brought to bear on his. In 2019, investigators obtained a court order to exhume the boy's remains one more time. This time, they were able to extract a viable DNA sample. They created a full genetic profile and uploaded it to public DNA databases, beginning the painstaking work of building a family tree. It was a long shot, but it was the last shot they had. Then, on December 8, 2022, the Philadelphia Police Department held a press conference. The room was silent as the police commissioner stepped up to the microphone and said the words that investigators had dreamed of saying for over 6 decades. They had found him. They had found his name. After 65 years of being a nameless symbol of tragedy, the boy in the box was identified as Joseph Augustus Zarelli, born January 13, 1953. He was 4 years old. Using investigative genealogy, police had located and identified his birth mother. Through that connection, they were able to obtain birth records and identify his father as well. Police have stated they know who was responsible for Joseph's death, but have chosen not to release the names publicly, as his parents are long deceased, and they wish to protect the identities of his living half-siblings, who never knew he existed. But the central, soul-crushing mystery of this case is over. He is no longer just the boy in the box, or America's unknown child. He is Joseph, a boy with a name, a birthday, and a story that was stolen from him. Giving him that name back is a monumental victory for the generations of detectives who refused to give up on him. This case, the mystery of his identity, is unequivocally solved. For our final solved mystery, we're leaving behind the world of murder and ghosts for a modern-day treasure hunt that captured the imagination of thousands and turned deadly for some. This is the wild, decade-long saga of the Forest Fenn Treasure. Around 2010, an eccentric, wealthy art dealer named Forrest Fenn, then 80 years old, decided to create a legend. He took a 12th century Romanesque bronze chest and filled it with his most prized possessions: hundreds of gold nuggets, rare coins, precious gems, and ancient artifacts. The total value was estimated to be as high as $2 million. He then drove out into the vast wilderness of the Rocky Mountains, which stretch over 3,000 miles from New Mexico to Canada, and hid it. To guide would-be adventurers, Fenn wrote a cryptic 24-line poem and published it in his memoir, The Thrill of the Chase. He claimed the poem contained 9 clues that, if followed precisely, would lead a clever searcher to the exact location of the chest. He said his goal was to get people, especially kids, off their couches and out into nature. And boy, did it work. What followed was a full-blown 21st century gold rush. Tens of thousands of people who became known as fanatics descended on the Rockies. They quit their jobs, drained their savings, and dedicated their lives to deciphering the poem. Online forums and blogs exploded with elaborate theories, dissecting every syllable of Fenn's poem. It was a beautiful, romantic quest, but the hunt had a dark side. The Rocky Mountains are no joke, and Fenn's poem led people into rugged, dangerous, and remote terrain. The treasure hunt quickly morphed from a whimsical adventure into a dangerous obsession. Tragically, the quest for gold turned deadly. At least 5 people are confirmed to have died while searching for Fenn's treasure chest. In 2016, Randy Bilyeu went missing in New Mexico, and his remains were found months later. In 2017, Jeff Murphy fell 500 feet to his death in Yellowstone National Park. That same year, Pastor Paris Wallace was swept away by the current of the Rio Grande, and Eric Ashby's body was found in the Arkansas River. The 5th victim, Michael Sexton, was found dead in March 2020. The deaths led to public outcry, with the chief of the New Mexico State Police publicly pleading with Fenn to end the hunt, saying, "He's putting lives at risk." Many began to suspect the treasure was a hoax, a cruel game played by a rich old man. Then, on June 6, 2020, Fenn made a stunning announcement on a searcher's blog. The hunt was over. The treasure had been found. He wrote, "It was under a canopy of stars in the lush forested vegetation of the Rocky Mountains and had not moved from the spot where I hid it more than 10 years ago. I do not know the person who found it, but the poem in my book led him to the precise spot." The news was a bombshell. The treasure was real, but the mystery wasn't over. Who found it, and where was it? Fenn, who passed away just a few months later in September 2020, refused to name the finder or the location, fearing the person would be harassed or even harmed by those who had dedicated their lives to the search. He only confirmed one major detail: the treasure had been hidden in the wilds of Wyoming. For months, the finder's identity was the most coveted secret in the treasure hunting community. Finally, in December 2020, the finder revealed himself. He was Jack Stueff, a 32-year-old medical student from Michigan. Stueff explained in an article that he had never wanted to come forward, but a lawsuit filed against Fenn's estate was going to reveal his name anyway, so he decided to take control of the story himself. Stueff was no amateur who got lucky. He was a deeply dedicated and intelligent searcher who had spent 2 solid years of his life singularly focused on solving the poem as a complex puzzle. He realized it wasn't about wandering through the mountains, but about a precise, logical decryption of the 9 clues. He solved it, traveled to the location, and found the chest exactly where the poem led him. He provided photos of the open chest and its glittering contents, ending all speculation. The treasure was real. The poem was solvable. The great American treasure hunt was over. This fantastic mystery is now, finally, solved. And there you have it. 5 iconic cases, 5 definitive answers. Which of these solutions blew your mind the most? Was there a theory you believed that turned out to be totally wrong? Let me know everything down in the comments. And as always, if you enjoyed getting some much-needed closure, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the unknown. Thanks for watching.